Discount Fallout, that's $59.99. Overpowered animals who pulverize your enemies, overpowered bugs who pulverize your fun, and the privilege of driving not only a badass tank, but your party of rangers through a myriad of branching plotlines. Welcome to you, old gamer. My name is Alex, and it is my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to help you decide whether that game that you have been thumping for so long is indeed the right game for you or not. And today's game is one that you have not been thumping for too long, for it came out on August 28th this year. We're talking about Wasteland 3, the latest entry in the Wasteland franchise. So if you're all about RPGs that put the player in the driver's seat, this game's trailer and reviews must have definitely caught your eye. Turn-based combat, impactful choices, and immersive, post-apocalyptic narrative and lore were the main selling points of this game, which also aspired to be the spiritual successor of the first two Fallout games. But is this truly the best post-apocalyptic Fallout-inspired game you could hope for in this modern day and age? Is it a bland, unimaginative, and generic title that falls short of every expectation? Or is the truth, as it is often the case, somewhere in between? Let's find out, shall we? As you know, I rate games according to a system of categories that feel relevant to the genre of the game at hand. And this is a classic isoparametric RPG that takes place in a fictional post-apocalyptic Midwestern America. I will leave a link to the video explaining the category system in the description below. Character creation and progression. So Wasteland has been around for 32 years. Let that sink in. It was originally created by Brian Fargo for Interplay, who also created Fallout 9 years later and Fallout 2 in 1998. Wasteland 3 has been marketed as a spiritual successor to the original Fallout games. And on that account, it kind of feels like Discount Fallout in many respects. And one aspect that fits this bill is character creation and character progression. The game asks you to choose from several couple of rangers with which to start your adventure, and these include young rangers, punk lovers, mentored student, father and daughter. This last one, for example, says, William has been a nearly wordless killing machine since his wife died. His daughter Lee Sing does the talking and some of the killing. So, why did William become a killer machine? How did his wife die? Was it traumatic? What did he do for a living before? Does he have any personal interests? Compare that to this description from a character in the original Fallout game. Albert is a charismatic leader of a small minority of the Vault population that is considering life in the outside world. Dedicated to the role of a negotiator, he is often able to communicate efficiently between parties. His professed occupation is closest to what was once known as lawyer. Albert is often able to convince others that his ideas are correct. See, this may seem like an information dump by modern-day writing standards for novels, but as a description for a character in a video game, this immediately creates character agency, which means I am far more likely to care about this character, to want to roleplay as this character, and to whom other characters in the game are going to refer to as an individual. Let's focus on the persuasion skill as an example.
Okay, now I got a few statements. I want you to tell me how much they sound like something you'd say. First one, conflict just ain't in my nature.
If your plan is to favor persuasion and avoiding combat, this is probably the character you want to go for. Albert has a profession, a preferred way of solving things, and chattering up people seems to be consistent with his personality traits. You can also persuade people in Wasteland 3 if you have a good enough score in the kiss-ass talent. However, this is presented in a way that is not tied into your character's personality in any way. And that is an example of something that goes a long way when it comes to caring about your character and wanting to play a said character. When you're done choosing between the couples of rangers presented to you or creating your own, you're then presented with a few categories of options that go from very superficial traits like name, genre, and voice to the somewhat more gameplay relevant background. Then you have attributes, skills, and quirks, all of which feel tremendously derivative of Fallout. But then again, this is something that we have come to expect. These skills, attributes, and quirks, however, are pretty straightforward and well explained, thus making it easy to build your character with a certain function and tactic in mind. Even if the game absolutely holds your hand with some information, like telling you that if you choose to go for small arms, you should also consider investing attribute points in coordination, luck, and awareness. I particularly welcome this handholding, as I am not in the business of reading long drawn-out guides of skills and attributes in Dungeons & Dragons fashion. Quirks are absolutely a tribute to Fallout's optional traits, and they go a long way into further honing your character so that he can play a certain role within your squad. If you go for a sniper, for example, you're going to want to absolutely max out your sniper rifle talent and dismiss everything else, and as the game suggests, boost the appropriate attributes. You might also want to consider the sadomasochist quirk, which increases your damage by 33% at the cost of taking 33% more damage. That is more than agreeable trade-off if you consider that, as a sniper, your character will likely be removed from the fray of battle most of the time. The whole skill, attribute, and quirk triad, while they will not win any originality awards, they work well together as a means to build your character. And that's mostly what you expect from any character creation and leveling system. As you level up, you'll also gain access to certain perks depending on your skill level. Here's an example. If you decide to take the Animal Whisper talent, you'll be able to unlock the Vengeful Bond perk, which on top of the advantage of being able to charm stronger and better animals that the base skill grants you, you get a 50% increase to their critical chance and a +2 action points when their constitution drops below 25%. These perks are all fine and dandy, but like the skills, most of them are kinda boring. I wish we had been given a talent tree of sorts. This seems like the kind of game that would have benefited from such a feature. A branching skill progression tree that allows you to further fine-grain your tactics. The shotgun skill, for example, could branch into alternatives, like a broader range of fire, or perhaps greater armor penetration. For me, the Animal Whisperer is a standout talent here. One that I didn't expect, one that I greatly enjoy, one that left me expecting there had been more like it. Non-combat skills, like lockpicking, nerd stuff, and modding skills, however, are cheapened by the fact that you can create experts in all these disciplines very early in the game, at no cost and with no hindrance. And that allows you to circumvent the opportunity cost that every role-playing game worth its salt has. For example, you can revisit every location in the game, hack every computer, pick every lock, and open every secret door that you couldn't before because you didn't have the right personnel. It also means that you can easily have the best mods applied to your weapons and armor because you can easily create an expert modder just to keep around for such purposes. That means that on your first playthrough, you're likely to have the best experience, at least gameplay-wise, because you're always going to have the right personnel, and that seriously cripples the replay value of the game. Take for example Underrail. If you choose to max out the lockpicking skill, you'll be able to lockpick ventilation shafts and move through large areas of the game through the ventilation system. This has a significant impact in the gameplay, but maxing out lockpicking also means you won't be able to max out other skills, which means you'll miss out on the perks and benefits of choosing those other skills. And that is what opportunity cost in a worthwhile RPG is all about. But overall, I think that this is a very solid character creation and leveling system, one that gets the job done. So for me, in this category, this game stands in the good tier, if leaning a little bit towards the meh. Gameplay. Gameplay consists mostly of turn-based combat, quests that advance the plot that have you making impactful decisions, and exploration. Combat plays very much like XCOM, and it generally has your team standing on one side of the combat area and the bad guys on the other. There are very few exceptions to this, but the few that there are is when the game truly shines. For example, there is this part in which you can lure some droolers out of a fortified location and flank them with your tank, or parts in which you can use your tank to splatter entire groups of enemies while you cower behind it. But since your talents and those of your opponents are so few and so generic, and since there is so little else than exploding barrels of fuel when it comes to environmental elements, these combat sequences are pretty average for the most part. I know that this is standard fare turn-based combat for firearm-based RPGs, but when you compare this experience to, let's say, Divinity Original Sin 2, this game feels like it's not even on the same league in terms of challenge, diversity of scenarios, combat situations and skills, etc. Earlier this year, I played Underrail, which is also an isoparametric RPG with turn-based combat that takes some inspiration from Fallout. I felt like the combat in Underrail challenged my tactical abilities a lot more, and it forced me to be creative, but it also presented me with a wide array of options and talents to make the most of my strategy and my tactics. On the other hand, however, I must confess that I am an absolute sucker for situations that ask you to defend your stronghold or your position, or to claim your stronghold back from an invading army. And spoiler alert, this game has got both of those. And I am happy to report that both of them are amongst my favorite hold the line moments in video games. I absolutely loved these moments, and in my estimation they elevated the combat above an otherwise average experience. While Wasteland 3's combat may be better than some, it is also very far from the top names in the game. Questing in Wasteland 3 is a decent experience. Quests don't feel too fetch questy, and they generally involve some manner of decision making. I'm not a fan of the writing in this game, and I'll comment on that later, but I think that it does drag down the gameplay a bit with it. One thing that this game does a lot better than most others is offering the player impactful choices. There was this quest in which I could choose between collaborating with a deranged group of cultists who worship some weird AI avatar of Ronald Reagan, or straight out attack them, or take some time to think about it. I decided to make a deal with them, but I never had the intention of making good on the deal. So the next thing I did was position my squad in vantage points, and then murdered everyone in the room. The game immediately acknowledged that and changed the mission objectives, but I could have done that part of the game in various different ways. I could have talked to one of the neighboring factions, which was a colony of hippie robots. Yes, this is a thing in this game, and do their bidding instead. I could have talked to the crazy Reagan worshippers and done as they asked. I could have come to an agreement with a rival faction and have them do the dirty work for me. Or I could have done as I did, which was to kill the cultist in the room far back and then make my way out commando style. Most games out there don't even dream of giving you this much flexibility, and those that do don't generally reward you with scripted dialogue and plot-based consequences. I still think Underrail did it a tad better, but this one was a very gratifying experience in this respect. There's also some exploration to be done in Wasteland, both walking around the locations you need to go to, as well as exploring the state of Colorado with your armored vehicle. Locations are generally small, there's not much exploration to be done, nor any awe-inspiring loot to be found. Driving around with your vehicle, however, is a different thing, as you can discover stores whose owner's willingness to make deals with you depends on your reputation with the factions they belong to. You may also run into random locations with various skill checks for you to gather the loot. Exploration is not Wasteland 3's strong suit, but overall I think the gameplay stands squarely in the good tier, story and lore. For me, Discount Fallout is yet again the best way to describe the writing in this game. Writing encompasses characters, plot, dialogue, and lore, and all of these aspects, while not terrible, and with very few notable exceptions, feel like they are the bare minimum that they need to be for the game to be coherent. As it has been mentioned, you create a couple of rangers at the beginning of the game. These characters do not have any personality, character traits, or relevant background to speak of. They also lack any personal stake or motivation in what they're doing. These rangers you create are sent to Colorado to seek the aid of the Patriarch, a dictator of sorts who's barely keeping things together in the state. But why do you need to get aid from him? Apparently the shit's hit the fan in Arizona for the Rangers, but you're never given any details about that. Who or what is the cause of this direness? Is there anything particularly urgent that must be tended to? Are people suffering? To which degree? Do my characters have any family? And if so, what's their condition? As a player, you're mostly asked to take the narrator's word for it and run with it. And I don't think that's particularly good writing. The result is that I was never invested in anything that was happening, not for long periods of time in the game. This Patriarch character is having a hard day at the office, putting up with his children and several other factions in Colorado, who are all hell-bent on ousting him from power. These factions go from mustache-twirling evil cults, to chaotic wacko terrorists, to resentful would-be dictators. The motivation behind most of these factions are shallow or weak, and the ones that are credible, because they stem from them being on the receiving end of some of the Patriarch's most ruthless and morally questionable actions, are still undermined by the extremely unlikable attitude of their forefront figures. In short, Wasteland 3 offers a broad array of factions and characters with which you can side, and that you can even bring into your party, but they all seem far worse than the Patriarch himself. Fishlips is the leader of a half-assed gang and also an asshole. Ironclad Cordite is a resentful warlord who right off the bat is less likable than the Patriarch. Victory Buchanan is a psychopath, and although he's absolutely hilarious, he sounds like he's absolutely going to turn on you and murder you the minute he gets a chance. Angela Death and Liberty Buchanan have an air of unbearable smugness about them. They feel forcefully shoehorned into the archetype of hardened badass character who seeks to oust the villainous autocrat. But they also sound like they are going to be far worse than the Patriarch himself for the people in Colorado and for every major player in the state. Dialogues are competently written, and the story never meanders off into overly convoluted and bloated subplots, but the characters, the plot, and the lore in Wasteland 3 are rather bland, and for the most part, they fail to get me invested in the whole deal. There is a 500-page lore book that comes with the game that adds an enormous amount of context to what's going on, and it's a not too shabby piece of literature, but the actual lore that made it to the game fails to generate the sensation that there's a lot more about this world than you're actually interacting with. Tyranny, for example, also included 5 pretty awesome short stories that added further context to some of its characters, but you didn't need to read these stories to feel like there was a lot more to the world and the characters than you were actually interacting with in the game. Let's take Fallout as an example. Fallout starts off by showing you the general state of affairs, both in the world at large and within Vault 13, your vault. You have personal reasons to set out and explore the world. You, as a player, also have a pretty good idea of what's going on in the world. So the landscape consists of people struggling to survive and power plays between various factions over scarce resources, all of which paints a grim picture that makes you root for your own character and care about the world he or she lives in. Good writing has always come to the rescue of these post-apocalyptic franchises, often making for some of its often many shortcomings. Wasteland 3 would absolutely feel like a counterexample of this if it were not for the fact that by the end of the game, the outcome absolutely feels like the product of your own decisions. Those deals you decided to uphold, those you betrayed, the factions you supported and the ones you didn't. Turns out that all that ends playing a part in the final succession of stills that explain how the story ends. So for me, the story, the characters, and the lore aren't bad. They aren't great either. There are just too many other games that have done it significantly better. So for me, in this category, this game stands squarely in the meh tier. Companions lore-wise. For me, this is without a doubt the game's weakest aspect. I'm afraid those flaws I already mentioned about the writing aren't limited to NPCs only. Companions in Wasteland 3 are amongst the most bland and uninteresting I have ever had. In some cases, it's because they feel soulless or generic. In others, I just don't seem to have enough information about them. Take for example Quan. This is the first companion to join your party, and he joins because apparently he knows what's what and who's who in Colorado. But he has no personal stakes in your mission, and he doesn't seem to have any inclination, motivation, or opinion on almost anything. He intervenes from time to time, yes, but it's not like what he has to say makes any difference. Lucia Wesson is a little better. At least she's concerned about her family, and later on she seeks revenge on those who wronged her. She's also a hardened Patriarch loyalist, and at some point during the story, she seemed to acknowledge that the Patriarch may not be the goody two-shoes dude she originally thought he was. But you don't ever see her slowly coming to these realizations as you progress through the story. She doesn't have much to say about anything actually, and unless it's something that personally affects her, she doesn't seem to give a shit about anything. Even when the Patriarch reveals that he provided prisoners to the Godfishers, and this is a band of psychopath criminals who tie dead bodies to kites and offer them as tributes to their god, she just stands there saying nothing, and never even mentions this later on. Pisepi is at least somewhat agreeable, humane, and even likable, but you meet her very late in the game, and by that moment you already know that having X or Y companion in your party makes little to no difference. There's also no romance in this game, no party banter, no useful or funny remarks coming from any of the characters, and precious few moments in which their intervention makes a difference. These are some of the most inconsequential companions I have ever had, and for this reason, Wasteland 3 in this category stands squarely in the bad tier. Companions gameplay-wise. You have control over every attribute, skill, and perk of all your companions and followers. That means that you have complete tactical control over your party's build, which is good. But your companions don't bring anything relevant or different to your squad than your recruits, which is kinda meh. Well, at least having full control over your companion's skill, attributes, and gear makes them tactically relevant and useful, which is more than can be said of games like Elex, Fallout New Vegas, and most others really. Compared to the others in the neighborhood, companions gameplay-wise in Wasteland 3 are pretty decent, and therefore earn their place in the good tier. Secondary mechanics. In Wasteland 3, you can buy and sell gear, mod weapons and gear, and gather NPCs to help strengthen your stronghold. There is no item crafting of any sort, although the game could have benefited from such a feature. There are some design issues with the buying and selling interface, issues that turn the experience into a chore. For example, you can compare your main weapon with the weapons the vendor has available for sale, but if you want to compare your secondary weapon, you need to exit the buying-selling interface, click on your secondary weapon to make it the selected weapon, and then talk to the vendor again. This is not good. There's also no way of knowing how much ammo per gun you have left while you're buying and selling stuff. Again, you need to exit the interface, check on all your ammo, and then talk to the vendor again. Modding weapons is equally frustrating. You seem to get the best mods at the very beginning. From then on out, Every mod you seem to get comes with a large side order of opportunity cost, the kind you don't want, with the trade-off almost always being disfavorable. There's also no lean way to switch between characters to mod their weapons. You need to exit the modding interface, choose a different character, and then summon the modding interface again. The interface is also bugged, and though I had a competent weapon modder most of the time, the interface kept summoning the owner of the gun instead of whoever was my expert, and that was very frustrating. These may not be the worst secondary mechanics I've been put through, but they are nowhere near the best. They are meh in my book, and let's leave it at that. Voice acting.
Oh, that does sound tough. But I'm not worried. Not as long as I got my good buddy Clarence here. Clarence? Clarence? Oh, no! Oh, Clarence! He was 2 days away from retirement!
This goes from okay to excellent. It is entirely voiced, which is a good thing. The delivery is generally solid, and there are some very impressive standouts. Everyone seems to embrace the Midwest vibe the game was going for, and this totally works. Characters like the crazy Reagan AI and the hippie robot are also brilliantly voiced. Overall, I think they nailed it. This game stands in the great tier in this category. Sound effects and mix.
You brought this on yourselves! You will suffer the same fate!
The sound is a bit of a mixed bag. The sounds in combat are amazing. Weapons sound distinct and accurate. Crits and kills are accompanied by this satisfying little key sound that adds all the oomph special occurrences like this demand. Explosions are brutal, nuke sounds are badass, and there are a couple of sweet little sound treats, like the squishing sound enemies make when they get run over by your armored vehicle. Outside combat, however, the sonic landscape is a little thin. I wish there had been more ambient sounds. The cities and locations feel kind of hollow and not lived in, and the lack of layers of ambient sounds, as well as the somewhat bland graphics, which we're going to talk about later, are partially to blame for this. Overall, not bad, with moments of greatness here and there. I'd say this stands in the good tier. Music. Have you ever had this friend who has brilliant flashes of humor at the worst possible times? Like tripping over at a funeral and saying, "Phew, I almost killed myself too." Well, this is how this game feels a lot of the time when it comes to music. The soundtrack consists of background music and song-like structured pieces. The fact that you have a radio playing music while you traverse the land feels extremely Fallout New Vegas derivative, only worse. In Fallout New Vegas, your radio was often your only companion, keeping you accompanied while you traverse the post-apocalyptic wasteland to find the next place where you could rest, or the faction with which you had business, or God knows what else. The music was original, fun, funny, memorable even. Some songs still stick with me today. The radio stations felt, like many more things in this game, like an effort to find joy and hope by a bunch of radio enthusiasts who, like everyone else in Vegas, seek to make the best they can with what little they got in a fucked up post-nuclear war landscape. The radio here sounds a bit like a Me Too effort, and I'm not talking about the movement that shall not be named. Something to emulate, something that worked very well in New Vegas, but that the creators in Wasteland 3 did not quite seem to understand why.
I can see the fire still alive, burning into the night. There's too many men, too many.
Don't get me wrong, there are some pretty good songs here. There's a decent bossa nova kind of rework of Genesis' Land of Confusion, and a bunch of original tracks that are really cool. But the problem is that many of the song-like themes in this game are used as combat music. What the fuck? When I'm fighting hordes of armored goons or zombie-like creatures, the last thing I want to hear is a song. Some of these songs are excellent, but I feel like they could not be more out of place during combat sequences. Some battles would go on for several minutes, depending on how you play them. so you could end up listening to these songs 3 or 4 times during your combat sequence. See, it's not unheard of in a video game that you have a soundtrack consisting of both instrumental pieces and songs, but there are far better examples of how this is done properly in other games, like Pillars of Eternity 2, in which you get an instrumental score to go along with combat and exploration, and then absolutely amazing piratey songs to keep you entertained while you sail the sea seeking your next adventure. The songs do have an adequate Midwestern vibe to them that seem to fit the quote-unquote spirit of the game, and the final track in the game is mind-blowingly awesome, as it effectively retells the story of your exploits in a creative, fun, and artistically impressive way. Background music is a bit of a different story. It's not bad, but for the most part it failed to convey any emotion. The soundtrack in Shadowrun Hong Kong, for example, managed to make locations feel dangerous and situations sad or tense, depending on the dramatic intention of the passage. None of that happened for me in Wasteland 3. Overall, the music is generally really good, with moments of absolute brilliance here and there, but it is often poorly placed in the game, and the non-song tracks are often unimpressive. It's a bit all over the place. It's great at times, good at others, and plain meh yet some others. I guess if I had to choose one tier, I'd say this aspect of the game stands in the good tier. Graphics. Although technically and even artistically, there's a fair bit of detail in most of the locations, the clothes, and the items, none of it feels terribly cohesive or concept driven. The game ships with an art book that looks pretty damn awesome, at least compared to the game, even if it also feels a little bit like they're copycatting Fallout at times. I can't help but feel that something got lost in translation here. I can't rightly tell if the isoparametric perspective is to blame here, or if it's something else. But as it happens with the music, the art depicted in this book feels like it belongs to a game that could have been, instead of the game that we actually got. Shadowrun and Underrail, even if it's obvious that they had a lot less budget to work with, seem to have gotten away with delivering a more immersive and lore consistent experience. I think the biggest problem of this game lies in the lack of depth in its lore, which leaves music and art, both of which are great as standalone pieces, a little bit adrift as part of an overarching concept. Overall, this is not bad, just kinda there. For me, in this category, the game stands squarely in the meh tier. Performance and stability. Lore depth aside, this is probably the biggest culprit of this game's final review. I could count at least 4 crashes throughout my experience. There were also 4 times in which the enemy turn never ended, 3 of which occurred at the same location, and 1 of those happened at the very end of the longest fight in the game. I already mentioned how there's no character agency with your main characters. Well, matters were only made worse during my experience when I had my 2 main characters stay at the headquarters while I took a couple of experts and lockpicking and nerd stuff with me to calm some areas clean of loot. Well, I got back to find out that most of my character's attributes had been stripped. Why? Don't know. I had to re-roll them again, as best I could. If I already didn't care about them, you can only imagine how I felt about my main characters after this. There are also some tiny bugs here and there, like not being able to pick a certain lock because I kept getting the message out of range, although I was standing next to it, or an exploit with your vehicle armor enhancement, which allows you to create infinite amount of duplicates in your inventory by only equipping unequipping the thing. This of course absolutely breaks the economy of the game if you decide to use it, as you can sell these duplicates for $300. But the worst offenders in this regard are the unacceptably long loading screens and not being able to choose a character and click on an empty spot to get him to move there, at least not all the time. Loading screens are not only long, but also poorly placed. If you need to go from your headquarters to the Patriarch's estate, for example, you'll have to go through no less than 3 loading screens. 1 to get to Colorado Spring, 1 to get to the part of the city where the estate is located, and a 3rd one to get into it. And the Patriarch's house is one that you'll have to visit quite a few times. But then there is this random house in the neighborhood that you'll probably only want to enter once in the entire game. That was my experience at least. And that one, you get to navigate freely without any additional loading screens. It also happened more than once that I had to suffer one of these 20 to 30 second loading screens while exiting a place, only to be immediately ambushed by some random mob in the map, and therefore getting yet another loading screen to get to the battle area. Moving your party around in combat, but most especially out of combat, became an unsufferable chore at times. At least 60% of the time, I had to left click on the attack button and then right click on somewhere just to get the character to move there. Sometimes not even that would work and I had to crouch, stand. change characters, and do all sorts of silly stuff to break the bug. I surfed the internet and this does not seem to be a very popular bug. Maybe I just got the short straw, but I have to call it as I see it. My system specs are way above the minimum requirements, by the way. Overall, this aspect of the game is almost disastrous, and it is an inch away from being unplayable. This for me stands in the ugly tier. Other considerations and final thoughts. Although I've said this too many times already, I can't help but stress yet again that Wasteland 3 feels a little bit too much like discount Fallout, only that it's $15.99 right now. A mix between XCOM and Fallout, with impactful plot choices resulting in different outcomes, sounds like an amazing concept. Unfortunately, that great game seems to be hiding somewhere within a core of bugs, bland writing, slightly above average gameplay, and overall poor game direction, which only allowed glimpses of this great game to shine from time to time. Our final score for Wasteland 3 is 6.4. I strongly suggest that you check out reviews by Carrick from ACG and Pam from Cannot Be Tamed if you wish to have a broader scope before buying this game. I'll leave both of those links in the description below. Right now, and until January 5th, this game has a 30% off on Steam. Might want to check on that if you still want to buy it. Well, I guess that's all I have for today. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you're seeing in this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Share the video, but most importantly, never stop gaming, but don't let gaming get in the way of your hopes and dreams. Bye everyone.